The gang laughed at Sylvester, mocking him as nothing more than an aging actor whose glory days had long since faded, just a relic of fake action scenes and slow-motion punches. To them, he was a has-been, a name from old movie posters. But the moment they threw the first punch, reality hit harder than they ever could. This wasn't Hollywood, and they had just picked a fight with the wrong old man. The bar, which had seen its fair share of rough customers over the years, had never felt tension quite like this. That night, something was different. A pack of wolves shoved their way inside, boots heavy with desert dust, leather jackets creaking with each movement like old bones. They didn't ask permission, they never did. They stormed in like the bar owed them money, and without a word claimed the back booth as their throne. What followed was their nightly ritual, crude stories, louder laughs, and pitchers of beer that vanished faster than Mick, the bartender, could pour. The story unfolded around a worn-down little bar, tucked away in a narrow alley off the back roads of Gallup, a small town in New Mexico. It was the kind of place where time didn't pass so much as it stalled, where folks who had nowhere left to go simply stayed. The air inside was heavy with the scent of old wood, spilled whiskey, and decades of whispered regrets. Mick, the bartender, had seen finer decades come and go. His hands were creased like dry riverbeds, and his eyes rested deep beneath brows of gray that never fully lifted. But his pour was fair, his silence sacred, and he read a room the way a preacher reads scripture. That night's regulars were a quiet crowd. Carla, a nurse off shift with tired eyes and a quiet strength. A long-haul trucker halfway through an overcooked plate of wings, and a couple who hadn't exchanged a word since they sat down. The peace that filled the room was the kind only empty spaces understand still, slow, and just a breath away from sadness. Then the door opened, and the low dusters walked in. There were 5 of them, boots thick with desert dust, leather jackets creaking like worn-out saddles as they shoved through the doorway, like the bar owed them money. At the front was Ricky Boy Hawk. He wasn't tall, but he walked like a man who thought he was. That grin of his carried the weight of someone who always had the last word, even if it came with a busted lip. Behind him came his crew, Wes, Denny, Cruz, and a scrawny kid they called Little Mike. Ricky didn't speak. He didn't have to. They stormed toward the back booth like it was their throne room, then launched into their nightly ritual. Stories meant to offend, laughter meant to intimidate, and pitchers of beer that vanished faster than Mick could pour. Carla instinctively clutched her purse closer to her chest. The couple exchanged a glance. Mick just kept wiping down the same glass, his eyes narrowing slightly. The dusters weren't strangers in Gallup, but they sure weren't welcome. Ricky had a way of filling a room with the kind of noise that made folks hold their breath, like someone had lit a match in a room full of gas. And yet, for a brief moment, it was just another Thursday night until the door opened again and everything stopped. He stepped in with the kind of silence that made the rest of the room feel too loud. The man looked like he belonged to another time, faded bomber jacket, softened by sun and years, jeans worn thin at the knees, and a face carved not only by age, but by the kind of life that left marks deeper than skin. His boots didn't stomp, they whispered. In his hand was a dark green duffel, the military kind, and he set it down next to the bar, without a word. The shift in the room wasn't fear. It was awareness. the quiet kind that travels faster than sound. "Bourbon," he said, his voice like gravel under worn tires. "Neat." Mick poured without blinking. The man nodded, took a sip, and stared at the dusty mirror behind the bar, like it might show him something no one else could see. Carla froze mid-sip. The trucker leaned forward. "And Ricky?" Ricky started smiling. He cocked his head, grinning like a hyena. "Hey," he called out, just loud enough to cut through the hush. "Ain't you that guy from those fight movies? Rocky or something?" The man didn't respond. Ricky snorted. "You look familiar. Got one of those faces, like someone who used to be somebody." Still, nothing, just another slow sip of bourbon. Ricky pushed back from the booth and swaggered toward the bar, his crew watching closely, like hounds waiting for the signal. He slid onto the stool beside the man. "What's your name, old man?" The man didn't look up. I said, "What's your name?" Ricky's voice rose, not in power, but in hollowness. Finally, the man spoke. "Sylvester." Ricky blinked. "Like Stallone?" A pause. "Exactly like him." Ricky let out a loud, mocking laugh. "No way! You here filming a sequel to all those fake fight scenes?" Sylvester finally looked at him calm, measured, unimpressed. "What's the matter?" Ricky smirked. "You come here trying to remember who you were?" "I came here to finish a drink," Sylvester said, his voice unshaken. "That's all." Ricky leaned in, his smirk curdling into something meaner. He grabbed Sylvester's glass and tipped it, letting the bourbon spill across the bar, soaking into the wood, dripping onto Sylvester's jeans. "Oops," Ricky said, grinning. "Clumsy me." The room froze. Carla was halfway out of her chair. The trucker shifted on his stool. Even Mick paused mid-polish, the bar towel suspended in his hands. Sylvester didn't flinch. He calmly reached for a napkin and dabbed at the bourbon on his leg. No anger, no rush, just control. "You still have a choice," he said softly, his eyes fixed on the bar top. Ricky leaned in closer. "You threatening me, Grandpa?" "I'm giving you a way out. That was enough." Ricky grabbed for his collar, trying to yank him off the stool. But Sylvester wasn't there anymore. In the blink of an eye, he was on his feet, twisting Ricky's wrist midair, snapping it back with such precision that Ricky howled. A turn, a shift, and Sylvester drove the man down onto the bar top with a dull, final thud. Chairs scraped back. Wes grabbed a pool cue. Cruz lunged for a bar stool, but Sylvester moved like water fluid, clean, unstoppable. Wes swung. Sylvester ducked low, drove a jab into the ribs, and sent him tumbling into the jukebox. Cruz lifted the stool, but Sylvester met it midair, shoved it into his gut, and dropped him in a heap. Denny froze near the booth. Little Mike backed slowly towards the exit. Sylvester stood, chest rising but steady, hands loose, like he was still holding that bourbon glass. Ricky rolled onto his back, lip bleeding, eyes wide. "Who the hell are you?" Sylvester looked down. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "A man who remembers what real strength looks like." And with that, he turned, picked up his duffel bag, dropped a few bills on the bar, and walked out into the quiet New Mexico night. Mick finally exhaled, long and slow. "God damn," he muttered. Carla whispered, "That really was him, wasn't it?" The trucker just nodded. "Yeah," he said softly. "It was." Outside, Sylvester climbed into his old black Ford, turned the key, and let the engine rumble to life, like an old friend waking from a nap. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. He hadn't come to be remembered. He came to remind. The sky above Gallup burned with that peculiar orange glow, only a desert dusk could offer. The sun melted behind the hills like it had no interest in tomorrow. Somewhere along Route 491, Sylvester Stallone drove with the windows down, letting the dry wind roll through the cab of his truck. It was quiet now, except for the soft hiss of tires against the asphalt and the occasional buzz of a telephone pole catching static in the distance. The duffel bag in the back seat didn't move, heavy with things he hadn't needed in years: gloves, wraps, a set of old, worn-down boots that had seen more canvas than carpet. He wasn't running. He was never the running type, but he also wasn't looking to be found. Back at Coyote's End, the dust hadn't settled. Not really. Ricky Boy Hawk sat on a bar stool with an ice pack pressed against his cheek, the sting of both bourbon and humiliation still fresh. His crew circled quietly, scattered among overturned chairs and a floor that still smelled of sweat and broken pride. None of them said it aloud, but the energy in the room had shifted. That man, whoever the hell he really was, had changed something in them. Not just their faces, their rhythm. The whole dynamic had cracked. Little Mike leaned against the wall, rubbing the back of his neck, eyes flicking toward the exit, like he was already halfway gone. Wes sat on the floor, still catching his breath, while Cruz kept shaking his hand like it had touched something too hot. Ricky, though, was still boiling, not just from the pain or the embarrassment, but from the way Stallone hadn't even broken a sweat. "You all just gonna sit there like a bunch of cowards?" Ricky growled, eyes bouncing from one to the next. No one answered. They didn't need to. He could see it in their silence. Fear. Not the kind that came from losing a bar fight, but the kind that sank in when you realized you were outclassed in a way you didn't know how to name. Jesse, the youngest of them, maybe 20, a kid who still wore his baseball cap backward and never quite looked anyone in the eye, spoke up first, voice uncertain but honest. "That guy, he wasn't normal, Rick." Ricky turned slowly, ice slipping off his face, eyes sharp. "What did you just say?" Jesse hesitated. "I'm just saying. We were 5-on-1, and he moved like hell. I don't know what. Like he was seeing us move before we even did. That ain't normal." Ricky stood up, slow, like every joint in his body had a reason to protest. "You think just because a man throws a few punches that we're supposed to tuck our tails?" His voice was low, mean. "That some washed-up has-been gets to walk in here, put us on the floor, and we just let that slide?" Jesse didn't answer. Ricky stepped closer. "Let me tell you something about men like that. They want you to believe they're untouchable. That just 'cause they got a little silver in their hair, a few stories to tell, they're legends. But legends bleed, and that guy's going to find that out real soon." He didn't say it, but they all knew what was coming. Ricky was going to find him. The pride that had built the low dusters couldn't survive that kind of public collapse. That night, back in a roadside motel on the outskirts of town, Sylvester sat by a small window in a room that smelled faintly of pine cleaner and tired linen. The TV played some old sitcom in the background, but he wasn't listening. His focus was on a battered leather notebook in his lap, pages filled with crooked handwriting and fading ink. He flipped through slowly, letting the memories drift across his mind like old songs. One page held a photo, him in his 30s, gloves up, a trainer by his side, both men smiling with swollen faces and split lips. He'd had a left hook back then that could stop a man mid-sentence, but that wasn't what defined him. It was the quiet between rounds, the breathing, the choices. He sipped his coffee black, bitter, just the way he'd taken it for 40 years. He'd known Ricky's type before. Flashy, loud, all fists, and no weight behind them. They didn't listen, didn't read the room, didn't know when to back off. And it wasn't about fighting, not really. It was about making noise, trying to drown out the silence of a life that hadn't turned out like they'd planned. Sylvester had been like that once, in his 20s, when his world was still made of fire. But the years teach a man things. They teach him that not every battle needs a victor. Some just need survivors. Just as he was finishing his second cup, he heard it, the unmistakable rumble of engines, not far off. Motorcycles. More than a couple. The sound wasn't angry yet, but it was too synchronized to be casual. He sighed, placed the notebook gently on the nightstand, and stood. He slid his jacket back over his shoulders, the leather folding against his spine like it remembered his shape. He walked to the sink, splashed water on his face, and looked into the mirror, not with pride, not with dread, just quiet readiness. The kind of look that doesn't ask for trouble, but never runs from it. Outside, the gravel crunched as half a dozen bikes rolled into the parking lot. Their headlights cut through the motel's dim light like blades. Ricky was at the front, walking with that same misplaced swagger, though the bruises around his mouth told a different story. Behind him, the rest of the crew was larger this time. Some faces Sylvester hadn't seen before. Recruits. Desperate men looking for a name to cling to. Sylvester stepped out of his room. The air was cooler now, the desert wind cutting sharp beneath the stars. He didn't raise his voice, didn't shift his weight. "You boys really want a rematch?" Ricky pointed, his voice carrying over the rumble of engines. "You humiliated me, in front of my crew, in front of that whole damned town. You think we're just going to let that go?" Sylvester looked at him, steady. "I didn't humiliate you. I warned you. You wrote the ending yourself." Ricky growled, reaching into his jacket and pulling out a steel baton. The others followed suit chains, bats, a glint of a switchblade. They formed a half circle, boxing him in. Sylvester stayed loose, hands at his sides, weight evenly distributed, breathing slow. "Last chance," he said. "You walk away now, and this ends." Ricky spat. "We're not walking away from anything." The air cracked with movement. The first swing came fast, a chain aimed at Sylvester's shoulder. He ducked low, swept the attacker's leg with a fast pivot, and drove an elbow into the man's side as he fell. A second came with a bat, but Sylvester was already turning, letting the momentum pass him, then landing a clean jab into the man's jaw. 2 down in seconds, but they kept coming. He moved with the calm of a man who didn't fight for adrenaline, but for clarity. Every move was deliberate, placed, efficient. The knife slashed near his side, but he turned his body just enough for the blade to catch only cloth. His fist caught the wrist, twisted, broke it. The weapon dropped, even the wind seemed to pause. One of the newcomers backed up, fear spilling across his face, but Ricky barked at him. "Finish him!" The man hesitated, then ran. 3 remained. Sylvester adjusted his stance. He wasn't tired yet, but he was getting close to being done, and they would feel the difference. As one of the dusters lunged, Sylvester caught his shirt collar, yanked him forward, and drove a knee into his gut. The man folded instantly. Another tried to blindside him, but Sylvester spun, using the man's momentum to toss him over his hip onto the gravel. Only Ricky was left standing, face bruised, eyes wide, breathing heavy. "You think this means anything?" he panted. "You think this makes you better?" Sylvester didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because in that moment, Ricky knew. He hadn't just lost a fight. He'd been measured and found lacking. Ricky didn't fall right away. He stood there, chest rising and falling, his fists trembling not from rage, but from the realization that no matter how many bodies he brought, no matter how loud he shouted, he was still just a boy, pretending to be a man in front of someone who'd already fought the kind of battles that don't leave visible scars. Sylvester's eyes were steady, unshaken, fixed on Ricky like he was already past the confrontation, already looking at what came next. "It's over," Sylvester said, his voice like gravel soaked in rain, low, worn, and final. Ricky's mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came. His chest heaved once more, and then the fight in him simply left. His shoulders dropped. His arms hung limp. His legs, once wide in a stance of challenge, shifted closer together in surrender. Without another word, Ricky turned and limped away, his steps unsure, his pride shattered. The others followed in silence, bruised, battered, some limping, some supporting one another, as they returned to their bikes like broken dogs wandering home. The engines started one by one, not with the triumphant roar of men riding out after conquest, but with the reluctant groan of losers leaving a place they no longer belonged. The last of the taillights vanished into the dark, leaving only dust and the hum of the cooling desert. Sylvester stood still a moment longer, the wind catching the bottom hem of his jacket. He glanced at his hands, not shaking, not clenched, just steady. Old hands that had held too many gloves, too many ghosts. He turned back toward his motel room. The door creaked as he pushed it open. The room hadn't changed. Same flickering light above the sink. Same cheap art print of a mountain range that looked nothing like New Mexico. Same chair by the window, and the old notebook still lying where he left it. He sat down slowly, his body starting to feel the weight of what had just passed. The bruises would come in the morning, dull and slow, but the weariness wasn't just physical. He picked up the notebook and flipped to the back pages, the ones with names, some crossed out, some circled, a few underlined twice. Old sparring partners, friends who didn't make it, rivals who became brothers after the final bell, and somewhere in there, tucked inside the flap, a photo. Him and Mickey, years ago, sweaty, smiling, broken noses and grins, like they had the world by the tail. Back then they fought for titles, for pride, for the rush. Now he just fought to keep the quiet. He reached for the coffee pot still warm somehow, and poured what was left into the paper cup beside him. As he sipped, a soft knock came at the door. He paused, his ears tuned not to the sound itself, but to the rhythm behind it. Not angry, not urgent, just a knock, like someone who didn't want to intrude. He opened the door to find Carla the nurse from the bar, standing there, holding a paper bag from the diner across the street. Her hair was tied back, eyes soft with something between admiration and concern. "Figured you hadn't eaten," she said, handing him the bag. "Place was a mess after you left. Mick said he's seen a lot of things in his years, but nothing quite like that." Sylvester accepted the bag with a small nod. "Thanks," he said simply. Carla didn't leave right away. She shifted her weight, then looked at him with that same searching gaze people get when they know they're standing in front of someone who carries more than they show. "Who are you, really?" she asked. "I mean, I know who you are, but who are you now?" He didn't answer right away. He walked back inside, sat down, and gestured to the chair across from him. She followed, sitting quietly as he opened the bag and pulled out a sandwich and a small container of coleslaw. "I used to think I was a fighter," he said. "Thought that's all I was. Fists, footwork, fire. But fighting, that's not just about punching. It's about surviving the spaces between. The days when there's no ring, no lights, no crowd. Just you and everything you've done." Carla leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "And now?" He looked at her, eyes still as stone. "Now I'm just a man, trying to keep those fights from finding me again." They sat in silence for a moment, the kind of silence that didn't ask to be filled. Then she smiled, soft and genuine. "Well, whatever kind of man you are, this town needed you. Those boys have been running wild for months. You didn't just stop them. You reminded the rest of us what it looks like when someone stands up without needing a spotlight." He nodded, slowly. "Not everyone's meant to be loud. Sometimes quiet holds more weight." The next morning, the sun cracked over the horizon like a yawn. Sylvester stood outside the motel, sipping fresh coffee from a thermos Carla had left at his door. The world felt stiller than it had the night before. The kind of stillness that follows a storm, not peace, but acknowledgement. Down the road, a sheriff's cruiser rolled up slow. The kind of crawl that said the man behind the wheel wasn't looking to arrest anyone. Sheriff Tom Baxter stepped out, hat in hand, boots dusty, eyes calm but sharp. He looked like he'd been sheriff forever, and maybe he had. "Morning," he said. "Heard there was some excitement last night." Sylvester didn't flinch. "You could say that." Tom squinted at him. "I also heard you didn't start anything, just ended it." Sylvester didn't confirm or deny. He sipped his coffee. "Appreciate you not making me fill out paperwork," Tom added with a dry smile. "I hate paperwork." Then he tilted his head. "You staying in town long?" Sylvester shook his head. "Number just passing through." The sheriff looked down the road toward the horizon. "Well, if you ever pass through again, coffee's on us." With that, he tipped his hat and drove off, leaving a trail of red dust and a strangely comforting sense that maybe the world still recognized right from wrong. By noon, Sylvester had packed up. The notebook went back in the bag. The boots stayed behind. He left them on the motel nightstand with a note. For the next fighter. Know when to stop swinging. Carla came by one last time. She didn't say much. Just hugged him quick, tight, real. "You ever need a place to land," she whispered. "You've got one here." He smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach his lips but lived in his eyes. Then he drove. Miles passed. The desert gave way to hills, hills to forests. The road ahead was long, unwritten, and he didn't need to know where it ended. He just needed to keep moving. Because sometimes a man who's fought his whole life doesn't need another opponent. He just needs a direction. Back in Gallup, people still talked. The story of the old fighter who walked into a bar, took down 5 punks, and left without saying a word spread faster than the desert wind. Some said it was Stallone. Others weren't sure. Mick just smiled and said it was a man who reminded us what grace under fire looks like. The legend grew, as legends do. But Sylvester never heard those stories. He didn't need to. He hadn't come to be remembered. He came to remind, and when the road stretched wide, and the wind blew strong, and the past caught up in the rearview mirror like a shadow that couldn't quite keep up, he rolled down the window, let the air in, and whispered, "Still standing."